You are listening to the second episode of the Alternating Sloth podcast. For those who don't know, the Alternating Sloth podcast is a casual talk, more laid back podcast, as opposed to our usual podcast, Insert Cast, which is interviewing professionals within the audio industry. My name is Connor Marson, and you're listening to the Alternating Sloth cast. So what have I been up to this week? Well, I am finally, for the first time, watching through all of Breaking Bad. I only saw the first season. I got very busy with my studies and I wasn't able to finish the rest of the show. And my brother and both my flatmate have told me that I should watch the Breaking Bad movie. So I went and I got a copy of a couple of the seasons, and I've been basically watching for a couple of the seasons. I'm on season 3. I just finished the episode Fly, which was the one where they're basically just, I think it's what they call a bottle episode, where it's just not much of the cast, and it's actually a really good episode, I'd say. It started off a bit slow and I wasn't too sure about it, and I was like, come on, stupid fly plot. But then I kept watching it, and the more I thought about it, the more I paid attention to everything, the more I started to really like the episode. I kind of know already what's going to happen with the show because I saw all the spoilers and stuff when they were coming out. So I know which characters are going to die and which ones aren't, which is a little bit annoying, but at the same time, I kind of don't mind having a show spoiled for me, because if I just get engrossed with the show, I don't really care after a while. It is kind of annoying because it's like, oh, my favorite character, Hank, I know is going to die in season 5. But I'm really enjoying watching his arc and seeing where he's going. He had a really cool shootout with 2 Mexican cartel guys. That was pretty cool. But I'm enjoying it a lot. I will say, though, I don't like Walter White as a character after the second season. I think he's interesting to follow, but I think he's just a terrible person after watching through season 2. I just can't really see him as... I don't like following him sometimes. Sometimes I'd rather follow Hank or even Gus, because Gus is a terrible person, but he knows he's a terrible person, and he knows what he's doing is terrible, versus Walter White, who's this terrible person who for a long time just sort of justifies that, no, I'm a good guy. I just, have to sometimes do bad things to do the right thing, which I think is interesting, and I think his actions are somewhat justified just when he's making drugs in the first couple episodes, but I think where he's gone now in the other arcs, he's just turned into a horrible person. And interestingly enough, Jesse, who was not really a nice person in the first couple episodes, has slowly became a slightly nicer person, and every time you see him and what he does, his actions are a lot more justified, and you can sort of understand where he's coming from. I still think a lot of where he is a lot of his own doing, but you can also see he just has his problems, and he's really just a guy who's just struggling and just needs help. And yeah, it's certainly an interesting character arc and an interesting character study. I think it's an interesting show, and I'm going to keep watching, obviously, until I get to watching that movie. And I'll update you, obviously, with further podcasts on my thoughts on what I thought of the show. So, what else was I going to talk about? So, yeah, last week Zookeeper's closed. So I've been still tooting away playing music. For those who didn't listen to last week's show, my favorite basically place to go in Invercargill, where I'm based in New Zealand, closed down, and it was the one place I went for open mics, and now it's no longer there. So I'm trying to find somewhere else to go, and I'd rather not drive all the way out to Dunedin, because that's like 3 hours, plus sometimes to get out there. Then you have to get somewhere to stay, and it's a cool place, but I don't, I like Dunedin a lot, actually, but while I'm in Invercargill, I don't think I'm gonna drive out there every Thursday the same way I went every Thursday to Zookeepers just for a gig. I mean, maybe I'm getting pretty antsy at the moment. I've been playing a lot of guitar lately. I've been practicing a lot, and I'm starting to get a really good set. But I'm getting kind of pissed that I can't go and do this set now. So that's a bit annoying. I've also been, I learned Wipeout on the guitar recently. I know some people are listening like, oh, that's an easy song, but, I've always had an interest in surf rock guitar, and I've only just sort of learned guitar in the past year, and I'm mostly self-taught, and I was just sort of, playing around with sort of just playing on the guitar, and I was like, oh, that sounds a little bit surf rocky, and then I googled a bit and sort of figuring it out. It's a fun song to play, but you definitely need a drummer to play Wipeout. But it's a fun song to play, and I do enjoy playing it. I'm gonna try and learn some more surf rock at the moment because I've been listening to a lot of surf rock music, and I've also been listening to a lot of bluegrass. Well, mostly just general country music, and I like a lot of the finger picking stuff, and I really want to get good at that because I played bass a little bit before I played guitar, and I did have some lessons on that, and I gave up the bass pretty early on. But I did play it for a little bit, and I think playing it has made my fingering actually a lot better on the guitar. So I'd like to really work at doing some finger picking stuff and just sort of doing stuff that's soloing with that sort of thing. Not just, doing bends and the typical stuff that most guitarists learn for guitar. So I was trying to think, this is the second episode, and I generally wanted to make this a general talk, but I also thought maybe I could talk about topics that I maybe talk too much about in real life, and I need to maybe dedicate an entire podcast so I stop bothering my friends about it, or just a topic that interests me that I don't feel I can necessarily cover on Insert Cast because it's something maybe a bit more personal about my life, or I'm for example, I'm a massive geek, and not just an audio geek, but I'm a bit of a comic geek, as you heard last week, me talking about the Joker and art and all that sort of thing. I'm a little bit of a comic geek, I'd say. I'm a bit of a film geek, and those who really know me know I'm a bit of an anime geek as well. I'd say I'm a little bit less than probably what I was back when I was a teenager, but I still watch occasionally. And I'm not going to dedicate an entire podcast to it, but maybe I might talk about it from time to time. I'm not watching any anime currently, but I am reading manga, Japanese comics, at the moment. I know some people won't like me saying Japanese comics, but that's what they are. Yeah, I've been mostly reading those, and I've been reading Green Lantern. I like Green Lantern a lot. I'm reading the Guy Gardner run at the moment. I'm reading mostly Jeff Johns stuff, for those who read comics. But yeah, that's what I'm doing in terms of that stuff. And this is the sort of stuff I maybe want to cover on this podcast. So I was thinking one of the topics that I wanted to talk about that I have talked about a lot with my friends, and I love talking about it because it was such a fun experience. And it's a long story, and I tell it a lot, and I have had friends sort of look at me and go, "Oh, he's going to talk about his trip again. Here he goes, he's going to talk about his trip again." Because I went to Japan last year, and I love talking about it, obviously, and I'm thinking of going again. I had a very good time when I was over there, and I had some interesting things happen, but I don't regret a single moment I was there, and I don't regret going on the trip, even though at one point, there was a point where I was almost going to cancel, because I had a bit of an air problem, which I'm still dealing with. Maybe I'll elaborate that on a later podcast because it's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But I've always kind of wanted to talk about this, and I always want to talk about it whenever I can because I had such a fun time. And my only regret was I wish I could have went with a friend of mine who sadly couldn't come along, cancelled at the last minute. And I kind of wish I went with him because it's always fun to share those sorts of experiences. And sadly, some people I met there who I had their contact, tried contacting them, and it just didn't work. There was a guy I met from, if he's listening, there was a guy I met from the Netherlands called Nick. I would like to contact him again and keep in contact with him. He was a good guy, and it'd be good to be friends still. The guy I met in Brisbane, I tried getting a hold of when I was over in Oz. Didn't seem to work. Whatever. But it would be cool to have, be in contact with some of these people still because I had a lot of fun over there. So, why did I go to Japan is probably a good place I could start. So, I've kind of always wanted to go to Japan. As I said, I'm a bit of an anime geek. I've been one since I was a teenager, around the same time I was getting into music. And I like a lot of other stuff about Japan too. I wanna make that clear, because I was a bit of a weeby sort of guy in high school, but I'd like to think I've gotten a little bit out of there. I mean, my friends would probably still say, "Oh no, you're still a bit of a weeb because you still talk about Japan and all that." But I'd say actually going over there has definitely changed how I've felt about the culture and a lot of things. And also, before I left, I actually wasn't consuming that much anime or manga. I'm not consuming that much now on a general basis, but I occasionally do. And so, yeah, there was that interest for that sort of stuff. That was one of the reasons I wanted to go there for a long time. But I've also just had an interest in the music and the culture and just the general look of the country has just always interested me. Most of my family also has not been to that many parts of Asia. My brother has been to Beijing and I think he's been to Hong Kong. No, he's been to Beijing, he's been to Thailand. And those are the only two places he's been to in Asia. And he hasn't really been anywhere else in Asia. And my dad hasn't been anywhere in Asia. And my mum stopped off in Hong Kong for a couple days and hated it, sadly. I think it was just, she had been from a big trip to Prague and I think it was just the wrong time. But I wish, I wish she got to do a proper trip there because I feel like she would like it. And if the protests, if everything goes well with that, I'm not going to say which side I'm on because I'm not going to get too political here today about it. But if it gets, if it gets to a point where people can visit the country again, and they've either come to a resolution or something, I'd still like to visit Hong Kong. I really like Hong Kong. That was actually my gateway into anime and a lot of Asian culture was through going to my local video shop and picking out kung fu movies and then eventually going, oh, well, I like these actors. What else are they in? Or what other things are coming out of Hong Kong that are interesting? What other movies? So I started checking out like dramas and other action movies, the John Woo movies, things like that. And then I came across some Japanese cinema. Didn't really find I liked it, but I had been seeing some stuff that I started to realize was anime on TV. And they usually, at most video shops when I was a kid, would put all the, Asian cinema in the same section near the anime, or it would, be near the cartoon section, which would also have the anime in it. So I just ended up, being in that video store and then going, oh, okay, I like this movie. This is cool stuff, oh, I've seen this, this is right over here as well. I'm going to pick this up as well while I'm here. And so that's sort of just how it came about. And so I have a lot of love for Hong Kong in terms of its landscape and also just the movies they make. And also, and so I'd like to visit there. And as I said, I had an interest in Japan because of the stuff I was seeing in anime and a little bit in some films. I like some Japanese films. I like a movie called Departures and Kwai-Don. Those are probably two of my favorites you can check out. They're pretty good. But I decided to go to Japan not just because of those reasons. I mean, that was definitely something that pushed me. But I was my first year of studying in this 3 year degree that I was doing. I found that I was really stressing out, and I didn't really have an end goal at the end of my year other than to finish the course. And I got to a point in my second year where things just weren't going well. I I had I had an attempt on my own life, and I felt I needed to change something in my life, and I needed to set myself goals that weren't just trying to finish course and yeah, just something other than just trying to finish course off, because while that's not a bad goal to have and to work at, you need other things in your life, and I wasn't really doing that, and I was just sort of, I didn't feel like I was doing that well on the course, but I also, so I was scared of failing. But I feel like I needed a second motivator to not only finish the course, but to also be like, okay, I finished the course, I need a proper break, and I need to go somewhere else. Because I also, I realized when I went to Japan and when I finally came back that the thing I actually needed was perspective. I needed to see different lifestyle. I needed to see different people. I just needed to be in a different environment. I found the environment that I was staying in just wasn't great for me. That's what I find works for me. Getting into a better environment, setting yourself a different goal, can get these sorts of thoughts and these sorts of a sort of behavior out of your head a lot of the time. I know people would say, can't you just think about, the people that love you and all that, and you should have that. It's good to think about, that people are looking out for you, and I think it's good to also talk to people, and you sometimes need a reminder from people actually that, hey, people do like you, people do trust you, because you will find yourself sometimes, you get stressed out, you're in a new place, you find yourself, getting maybe a bit depressive, a bit sad. I've had, trust issues in the past and other issues that I'll maybe get into on a later podcast that I've had to work through over these past couple of years. And I found, for me, setting myself a big goal that wasn't just to finish the course, but to also set myself something that was going to put myself sometimes in a hard place financially, that was not going to make me necessarily happy, but was going to, if I worked through that, it was going to push me and drive me to keep going, I mean, I had this stupid idea for a little bit that, like, oh, well, I won't kill myself until I go to Japan. I've got to, I thought, well, I thought in my head for a little bit. I thought, well, if I'm going to kill myself, I need to do something that, what's the things on my list that I would do before I would die? And going to Japan was one of them. And then when I went there, I realized, well, it was kind of stupid for me to think, that sort of way. But at the same time, that rationality was what got me through and got me to go to my trip to Japan. And it really, really helped. I would actually say that if anybody is in a situation where they feel like they're going to take their own life, set yourself a goal, set yourself some sort of end goal, some sort of plan that isn't maybe just finishing work every day, because course to me after a while it just felt like work. It didn't feel like just a happy, a fun goal that I'm setting myself. there's a difference between setting yourself a goal of losing weight or something like that versus getting all this paperwork done or getting something done for work or for your school or whatever, which it's not a bad thing to do. But yeah, I do feel like you need other things in your life to set yourself, and you need to sometimes see different perspectives, different lives. I mean, if you, as I said, if you're in a situation that's just getting bad and you're struggling, I would say maybe you need to at the end of the year go somewhere else, and that can just be I'm in New Zealand. Here's an example. So that could just be if you live in the South Island, maybe you go on holiday up to Taupo in the North Island and you save up some money and you set yourself that goal for the year, and you're going to do a bunch of things in Taupo. It could be something as small as that, or it could be something as a little bit bigger like Australia, or it can be as big as I'm going to go to South America, at the end of the year because I've always wanted to go to South America. It could be something like that. You know, you just need to set yourself goals, I think, sometimes, and it can be really hard when you've got one rigid thing that's set for you in front of you, and you've got all this pressure, and maybe you're not doing the best at it, and that can really hurt you. And when you're just focusing on that one thing and nothing else, it's good for a little bit of time, but then you need to take breaks. You need to relax, obviously, and sometimes you don't, and it can just be a lot of pressure. So that's what I would say to people who are in this situation, and also talk to people around you. Don't be afraid to say what's on your mind, say what you're feeling. I know sometimes you don't want to. I know, you don't want to tell your friend that you're having these thoughts, and you don't want to be shamed, or you don't even the nice things, like you don't want them to go like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Sometimes, you don't want to hear that. Sometimes, you you want to hear, you don't really know what you want to hear, but you want some, because sometimes the problem isn't just the people around you. It's a little thing. It could be a little problem, or it can be a big problem. And sometimes it's just working to a goal and setting yourself something else that isn't just this one work thing or thing that you're on, to get through what the situation that you're through. And as I said, if you're talking with people as well, if you're talking to your friends and you're telling them your problems, sometimes these little problems can be fixed. If it's something as simple as, well, let's say you've had this car for a long time and you love this car, and then all of a sudden your car gets smashed up in a massive accident, and all this work you've put in it, it's gone, and you're also having all this other pressure at work. Well, that's when you need to go and talk to your friends. That's when you need to tell them, and your goal might have to be now, saving up to buy a new car. But you can make it fun out of it. You can make a fun activity. You can do other stuff other than just work. You could say, let's do some car wash. I don't know, something fun to get a bit more money. If you needed to, maybe do some busking if you're a musician. You can think of other ways, and talk with your friends and let them know what's going on, how you're feeling, and it's better to do that than just pretend nothing's happening, because you'll find it will just get worse, and you'll just find yourself in a terrible place, and you might find yourself doing something that you don't really need to do. So yeah, I went to Japan, and I set myself a goal at the start of that year after I had this attempt, and after I didn't call my mum after the attempt, but we had been talking that year about setting yourself something other than just the course, and so I decided to also set myself this goal of going to Japan, and I think it wasn't January then, because I was in a new place, and I think this was maybe March or sometime around then, maybe late February. And so I set myself the goal of I'm going to go to Japan, and I was getting a student allowance at the time. I didn't have a job. Obviously, this would have been harder if I had a job. Um, but you're still getting to pay, somehow. And it would be the same sort of as course, except now I'm actually doing, I have this thing that I'm working at that's getting me money as well versus being at course. I'm just sort of working for a degree. But I decided I would take a bit of money out each week, and I would put it into an account, and that account would be for my trip. And I would do that each week, and I would work hard at course as well, and I would push myself at course while also doing that for my trip. And I did that, and there were obviously times when I got depressed and I struggled, but when I realized, well, I've got this trip, just got to keep working. I'll get this trip, I'll get there. And having that goal just pushed me even through some of the really hard times. And I never got necessarily too suicidal. I never got to that point, but obviously I got a bit angry. Obviously there were times where it was a bit hard to manage. There was one week where I just bought noodles for myself, and that's all I ate, just little packets of noodles. And that was terrible, but I did it. And I managed to get the money for my trip, and I had my spending money, I had my plane money, and all I asked my parents is I said, can you pay for my accommodation and I'll pay for the rest. And that ended up happening, and I also ended up getting a little bit of extra money because my birthday was going to be when I was going to Japan. So I got a little bit of extra birthday money as well for the trip, along with the Christmas money that was the accommodation. And I wasn't going to go when I actually finally got all the money, and I'd worked hard, but then I was starting to have this ear problem that I'll elaborate on a later podcast. And I was scared of actually getting on the flight because of this ear problem I had. And funny enough, doing this flight on the way back, it did do some damage to my ear. But I still don't regret doing the trip, even though that happened. But I ended up going. I did. My mum ended up kept on pushing me, and when I got up to Wellington for 2 months, I ended up getting a job at the hospital, and I worked as a kitchen hand, and also doing some sort of cleaning, dishwasher sort of stuff as well. And that was an interesting job. I didn't completely hate it. There were times I enjoyed parts of it. I'd say the washing, there was a big industrial washing machine, and that was way too fucking loud. I felt my ears were just in pain anytime I had to work in there. And there was one shift where I'd been working a pretty cush job. They had put me on for I think it was like a week or two, maybe a week. And that was just being in the back room, doing samples occasionally, just doing the food samples, making sure everything's there, giving people what they need, product-wise. And then also, checking the stock when it came in. And then occasionally I had to bring in milk and other things. And I remember one day they said, all right, you're going to do a bit of that, but you also have to help with some other things. And eventually they just put me onto those other things. And one day I did have a collapse. I did get a bit stressed out. I did get a bit dizzy. I was having some vertigo problems at the time. And I did have a major fall. And it was weird. It was like an out of body experience. I felt like I almost wasn't there. Like I could see everything that was going on and everything that was happening to me. And I remember they pinched my hand, and to get a sample of blood, and I didn't feel it. I felt nothing, and I thought that was really weird. And I couldn't talk. It's almost like I had a stroke or something. I think I had like a minor heart attack. I had some because I remember before I had the fall, I was feeling dizzy. I felt like I was losing oxygen, and I was having trouble breathing. And then I fell, and my heart was racing like crazy. And I just felt like I couldn't feel anything, and I could barely talk. I remember they tried to ask me questions, and I was sort of like that for most of the time when they were trying to talk to me. And I went through all of that, and then I think I got a week off because obviously the fall, and then I went back to work, and I worked my ass off, and I thought I did pretty good on the last couple of days. And I'll say the one good thing about work is I was able to keep in shape pretty well. I felt like I got a really good workout for my arms, pushing trolleys back and forth. It got a little bit. There was a couple of days where it was hard, but sometimes I was like when I finally got that trolley in and I got the food to the people and I went back, walking back, I was like, wow, I've done this, and I could feel the burn in my muscles, and you know. So that was really good, and I did that for like 2 months, I think, because I did a bit in November and a bit in December, and then January came around and I planned my trip, and I think it was for about 2 weeks, or like about a week or two. I know some people will be like, oh, you didn't plan it, but I had course in February, and so I decided I would, and I could have done it for the month of January. That was something I considered, but I just decided I would do it I just decided I would, do it for a week or two, just because it was easier money wise to get the ticket. So I did 2 weeks, and actually before those 2 weeks I did work a little bit in January as well. But so my trip, I don't remember the flight exactly. If I'm being honest, this is the little parts I can't remember. But I got to the airport, got on the flight. I think I went from Wellington. Yeah, I went from Wellington to Auckland. This is the stuff I do remember. I went from Wellington to Auckland. I had to go through, all the stops and everything, all the customs and all that. Surprisingly, even just going up, and then I went up, got to the international section, got through, and right before my flight, I called my friend Sammy, and we had a decent talk before I got on my flight, because she likes some anime stuff, and we've sort of bonded over that. So she was excited for my trip, so I told her, that I was about to board, and I was nervous, but I was happy at the same time, and a little bit excited. And I got on my flight, and it was 10 hours, the flight. And 10 hours, man, it is essentially a day. You do essentially lose a day, and you're on the flight, and it just after a while, I kind of hated it for a little bit, if I'm being honest. It was a bit painful on the ears, because as I said, I had a bit of an ear problem at the time, and that wasn't fun. But it wasn't too severe. I remember it wasn't massively severe. I just didn't really like it. And then I got off in Japan, and I remember we got off at night, and I really wanted to just get out of the plane. And I remember we had to wait. We got there, in Tokyo, and we're sitting in the plane, and it's ice cold. That's the other thing too. I knew I was coming in winter, but I didn't realize how cold it was going to be until later on. And we were on the flight, and we were waiting, and there was apparently some ice or something blocking the runway. So I was essentially sitting in my plane, waiting, and just really antsy to get out of the flight. And I think we waited about 15 minutes, and I ended up talking to the flight attendant for a little bit, and then finally got out. We had to go on like a little bus as well to actually get over to the airport, and that was interesting. That was a bit different. And then we got through the airport, and it was like going to a big abandoned warehouse or something. It didn't feel like a regular airport. I remember we went up like a big stairway sort of thing, like a wheelchair access sort of thing. I think I'm vaguely remembering this. And then there was like this sort of big warehouse looking thing. It felt like something I had seen in like a cop, like a shooting range thing, because it was like a big warehouse type thing, carpet, just big plain looking wooden wood on like around us, on the walls, like not really well painted or anything, just regular wood. And I remember we went through and they had this big massive line that was for people who weren't Japanese. And then there's this other small line for people who were Japanese. And the line that was people coming into Japan, it was pretty big. And it also like the custom people, they seemed like, just real stern. And I remember I've never had to do this, but I had to do this when I was in Japan. I had to do both my thumbs. I had to press them in ink and then stamp them onto onto like a little card thing or something or my passport, I think. But I had to do that. They did my passport. They let me go through, and I then had to figure out how I was going to get into Asakusa, which is where I stayed. Um, and I Luckily for me, Narita Airport is there's the right below Narita is the trains, like there's a train. The annoying part is though, going from Narita, you have to catch a different train from just there's not just like it's not just the usual one into Asakusa. I remember I had to catch a very particular train, and I had to tell the ticketer like I want this one. And it's the first time I got to use Japanese going off of a little bit off the flight. And so I got my ticket, I got on. I wasn't too sure if I got on the right train. So I asked the person right next to me, and I felt really bad. I spoke to him because I thought he was Japanese. And I spoke to him, and he turned to me. I spoke to him in full Japanese. I gave him a full Japanese sentence, and he turned to me and he went, "Hey man, we were just on the same flight. I'm from Korea, and I'm coming here for like a day, and then I'm going to Korea." So, talked to, had that talk for a little bit, and then he got off at like the very next stop. Realized I was on the right train. It took me a while to figure out the actual train system, to figure out the mapping of it. I could read it, but I hadn't seen a train map like this big, looking that way. And there was a digital one, and I was jet lagged, so I could read some stuff, but I was really tired as well, so my brain just wasn't working as well as it would have. And so I was just sort of sitting on the train and just taking it in, but then also feeling the massive cold when it hit. I remember I sneezed, and this is kind of gross, but my snot like basically almost froze. And so I had to like unzip my bag, grab my beanie and my jacket and something else, because I think I just had like a jumper on and a pair of pants, and like a little other vesting underneath, because I came from Auckland and Auckland was pretty hot. So going into Tokyo, it was fucking freezing, and I'm freezing my ass off. I get all this stuff on in the middle. I felt really bad because I've just opened up a massive suitcase in front of all these really quiet people, just patiently waiting for the next stop. And I'm getting on all my stuff, and thankfully, it was a while before they went to the next stop. So I had I had about like 2 seconds to get all my stuff out, unzip it, put the bag under, and then just hold on to one of the lines, and then take a seat eventually and just wait for my stop. And I remember a lot of stuff about the train. I remember all the sounds. In fact, one thing I did last week was I was on YouTube, and someone had actually uploaded some videos of the train stop sounds, because in Japan, when the train stops at a station, it actually has a theme song for every station. And after a while, I'm sure some people get annoyed of it, but as a tourist, you're just like you start to really like those theme songs, and you get used to them after a while, of course. But there were like a couple times where I'd get really excited sometimes going into certain stations, because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna hear this song. And then when I came back, it's just nostalgic now hearing those sounds again. And I remember the door opening sound. It sounded like a ghost or something. It was like, Like it was just because of the ice, I think. Just the cold had just stuck the doors, So there was just this, and it's funny when they have two different voices for when you're on the train system, and one of them is just the regular Japanese voice that'll tell you, the station. It'll be something like uh, ueno, ueno, da da da, ueno, it'll be something like that. I don't know the other words. I've blanking now, but it would be something like ueno, and then you'd hear the person in English, and they'd go, next stop is ueno, ueno, and it'd be some weird Canadian, it sounded like a Canadian lady or something, some sort of maybe Canadian American lady on the speaker thing. And the worst thing was I could speak a bit of Japanese and I could understand that the Japanese one would just tell you the station names and occasionally maybe one of a detail that you needed to know in terms of like something when you get in there or if there was a delay or something. But the English ones would always give you instructions on how you should behave on the train. And I think it's because sadly there's been some pretty bad, rude people on the Japanese trains from overseas. So you would have, Japanese person that'd speak, it would just be the next stop. And then the English person would come on. You'd hear two things about your next station, next stop, ueno. And then after that, it would be, please be mindful of noise on the train. Do not make too much noise for passengers on the train. So you would, you'd hear something like that on the train. And I remember the conductor voice when you finally did get, when you get the guy voice, when you get like the guy who I think's piloting the actual who's driving the train, he would be like, oh, next stop, ueno. It'd have this very, very sort of particular vocalism that you don't hear much in Japan. That was kind of funny to hear sometimes. And I remember I got off at Asakusa. I walked off. I had my bag with me, and I didn't know which exit to take because I hadn't been in a big station like that in a while. And of course, I'm still taking in everything, all the culture, all that, all the sights and smells. There's a very particular smell and there's a very particular feeling in the air, and it's obviously massively cold. So I'm trying to keep warm as well. And so I've got my bag, I'm dragging it with me, and I go up one of the exits, and I realize I thought I had taken the wrong exit. And because I was at this big booth with like where you essentially, push your train ticket in and then go through. And we don't really have those in New Zealand. I've been through a subway before overseas, but it'd been a long time since I'd used one of those. So I didn't know if this was the right one to go through into Asakusa. And I was waiting there and sort of trying to figure out, and I was going to ask someone. And then out of the blue, this guy who must have been one of the train workers, like an old dude, I figured he was going to come up and speak to me in a bit of broken English, with some Japanese maybe thrown in there, and try and explain to me, ask me where I need to go or, that sort of thing. But he came up to me and he spoke fluent English, like the best English. I'd actually say some of the best English I heard there from someone, who wasn't English. And he essentially, asked me what was the case, and I tried to explain in broken English to him. But after a while, I just sort of spoke regular because I'm like, oh, he can speak. So he just explained to me, yeah, you've got to, go up here, and showed me. He helped me get through the train thing, through the little, ticket booth thing, and then got me right up. And then I showed him where I had to go, and he didn't walk me all the way there, but he walked me a little bit outside and then pointed exactly where I needed to go, which end I needed to take. And so my first experience in Japan, getting someone very nicely helping me out to get to my hostel. And I remember I think it was maybe 10 or 11. It was pretty late there. And so I'm walking there, I'm taking all these sights, I'm taking in Asakusa, which isn't the biggest city in Tokyo, or the biggest district in Tokyo, but it's still a cool little area, and it's different, it's definitely different from New Zealand. There are things that are similar in terms of like size, but obviously, you're not used to seeing actual temples like around sometimes, and certain, you don't see 7-Elevens the same. They don't look the same the way they do in Japan. The feeling in the air, because I've essentially been outside for a tiny bit, to get on the bus in the airport, and then going from, the airport to the train, and then from the train outside, through the subway, train, subway, then outside. So I'd felt a bit of the air, but, this I could really take in the outside and see everything. And I remember for a while I was just sort of, I didn't stop, but I kept walking in my place, but I was just sort of had my head up looking around. And what was cool was the area that I was staying in at night. They had this really cool sort of neon lights just around like the gateway into the area, so I could see exactly where I needed to go. And I walked through there. I had to use a key because the place, it was pretty late. And I remember I got there and one of the ladies was just about to leave. And I told her, that I was coming in for the night. And she said, oh, okay. And I talked to her for a bit and she signed me in, and then she had to go. And yeah, I went upstairs. And the number one thing I definitely noticed about Japan is how small everything is in terms of. I'm not that tall. I'm about 5'9", and but that's still pretty tall for Japan. I found like all the little doorways and stuff. I would find I'd have to duck a little bit sometimes, or I would just have to not bend, straighten myself out too much. And it was also kind of cramped in a little bit. And I found I got on the elevator. It was all carpeted out, which was something I hadn't seen before, but that's something they do in Japan. And then I got upstairs, got into my room. They had, funnily enough, the two people, because I was sharing like a room, like bunks. And my room, funnily enough, was with two New Zealand people who were going up to Sapporo the next day. And so I was I was talking to them for a little bit, but I was also extremely tired. And I basically, some people would go outside and say, no, I'm gonna go with the jet lag. But this place, it didn't have a curfew. You could go out as late as you wanted, but I had already signed in. I already got all my stuff in, and I was pretty tired. So I just took a nap the next day, and then woke up. One thing I did find about the room was it was not cold. It was never cold, but the beds were so hard. I felt like it was just like gravel. Like I'd put myself down there, and at first I kind of didn't like it, but after a while, I felt like I was having the best sleep. Like after 2 or 3 nights, I felt like I had a better sleep than I ever had. And it's almost gotten to the point where I feel like I should probably get a harder mattress. Even though I don't like it, I feel like it's better for my back and just better for me in general. Because I found, for me, I slept better. And I got up the next day, I walked around Asakusa, and I saw the temples and everything, and I just took a full walk around. I did have to ask for directions quite a lot, but I was quite good. I learned one really good phrase that I used a lot in Japan, which is wa doko desu ka? Wa doko desu ka? And I'd use wa doko desu ka quite a bit. And I'd use it, for any sort of location around Asakusa. I wanted to get to my beanie that I brought with me. I think it was ripped, or there was some sort of problem. So I had to get a beanie because my head was freezing because it was freaking cold. So I was asking around. I asked two American dudes, where it was. They tried to help me. Wasn't much help. My phone, I made the dumb decision when I went to Japan actually of not getting a Japanese SIM card. So I did run into some problems there with, trying to use my data, trying to do calls, that sort of thing. And it worked. The internet, funnily enough, worked fine on at the hostel and at a couple other places I'll get into later. But I did have to ask directions quite a bit, and I find most foreigners are a little bit scared of the Japanese police. I see a lot of videos online of like being scared of approaching the police. So yeah, I find a lot of people are a little bit frightened of the Japanese police system. Sometimes they're scared of being, there's all these stories of people being pulled over and being asked, about their ID and things like that. And I find that didn't happen to me. I mean, I am a white guy, so I might have had that privilege there. But I ended up asking a Japanese policeman for directions, and I found he was very helpful, and he told me exactly where I needed to go, and I ended up getting there pretty quickly. Because I was trying to get to Don Quixote, that it's kind of like for New Zealanders, it's kind of like a $2 shop. For Americans, I guess it would be kind of like a Walmart or something like that. 99-cent store. Just cheap-ish stuff, a lot of wacky, weird stuff. I bought some green tea flavored Kit Kats from there. So it's that sort of stuff you can get from a Don Quixote. I also, that morning, I remember I was trying to figure out what to get for breakfast, and I had no idea what to get for breakfast. And I only had two bad meals when I was in Japan in terms of food. I only had two really bad things to eat. And one of them was I went to a Family Mart, which is essentially like a dairy, a Foursquare, 7-Eleven for Americans, but this is a different type. They had 7-Elevens actually in Japan. I did go to them a bit. And there was, funnily enough, an actual supermarket not that far from me, and also a 7-Eleven. But I ended up going to this Family Mart, and I ended up getting this horrible, what was it? It was a horrible mushroom curry thing or something like that. It just tasted horrible. And I tried to stomach it down. There was a vending machine actually in the common room area where we could eat food and stuff at the place. And I ended up getting apple juice quite a lot from there. Wasn't the best apple juice. Tasted a bit like cheap, apple juice you'd get. Like it tasted a bit funny. But it did the job, and that's what I had like a lot of mornings when I was there. So I ended up getting that. I'm eating this horrible curry thing. And there were some people there with me, and I decided, to just be polite, and I wanted to not only engross myself in the in the culture, but just the people as well. Push myself a bit to go out there a little bit with people and actually talk to people. And so I ended up talking for a little bit to one of the people in broken English. I tried speaking in Japanese, I think, but I ended up speaking broken English to one of them, and I realized halfway through they were from Taiwan, and they could speak a little bit of Japanese, but it was actually easier getting through with them in English because their Japanese was a bit worse than mine, actually, in terms of speaking, because my reading level for Japanese was actually really good. My speaking level was okay, but not great. And these people were even worse in terms of speaking Japanese. So I ended up speaking with them. And the funny thing was, there was about 12 people from Taiwan who I think were either family or just friends. And I talked to them for about 5 minutes. And within 5 minutes, they offered me like this sugar bread thing. Just bread that was like sugar flavored. It tasted really nice. It's just really sugary, really sweet. So I had that. Tasted way better than my curry thing. But they gave me a full loaf of that. They were offering me fruit. I just remember how generous they were. And I talked to them and we're just talking about general stuff like, oh, what do you do? Where are you from? These sorts of things. And doing some little small jokes. Some of them were funny. Some of them were, some of them they didn't quite get culturally. I don't remember all of them. I know that there were nothing like racist or anything. It was just, sort of things about maybe the job they were doing or something like that. I think one of them was in computing, and I made a kind of a geeky joke that didn't quite translate well. And I remember within 5 minutes, I had this food. I was talking with like most of them, and then a couple of seconds after that, they were like, "Hey, can I get a photo of you?" I was like, "Cool, all right, I'll get a photo of you." I was almost gonna ask for like a contact thing too, because I was like, "Cool, I've made a friend." Because I was just talking to the one dude for a while, I think he was the husband, and after like 2 seconds. He looks at everybody around him and he goes, "We'll take a photo." And he gets everybody, like 12 people. And I'm sort of sitting in the middle around 12 Taiwanese people. And they've got their camera out and they take a photo with me. It was a very interesting experience. And I remember they kept on telling me, Taiwan, nicest people, Taiwan, best place, you gotta go. So I actually wouldn't mind, even though that was a weird experience, I wouldn't mind going to Taiwan because it seems like a cool culture and they seem like really nice people. Um, so that was an interesting morning, and then yeah, going to the temples in Asakusa, and then going to Don Quixote and getting my beanie, and then I don't remember what I did. I don't think I went on the train that morning. I think I just went around Asakusa. I just wanted to get my bearings around there. And so I walked around a little bit. I didn't quite go into Sumida City, which is the area right next to Asakusa. I instead went into, and I just sort of walked around the main area. I think I ended up going to a place called Matsuya, where I got just basically like a beef bowl thing for dinner that night, and it was a pretty laxed first day. Wasn't until the second day when I met up with my cousin, who's from the US but who's been living there. She speaks really good Japanese, and she showed me around for the most part in the area. And we met up in Asakusa, and she said, "Oh, cool. I'll take you into Ueno, and you know, we'll go to some other places." And so we got into Ueno, and we went and sorted out my JR pass because I was going to go to Osaka at some point. And so we went for a line, we sorted that. I remember Ueno station is just massive. It's just like, it feels like it's got all these clocks, and it feels like a giant airport or something. It's just this big station where a lot of other stations go through. And I really liked Ueno. We walked around for a bit. She showed me some of like the shops, some of the main streets. We did look at a SIM card plan, didn't quite work. We looked at just a couple of little shops around there. And then she took me to a ramen place, and what I found is I didn't mind ramen in Japan, but I didn't like it that much, if I'm being honest. There was one place that's really good that I liked, but I found the ramen that I had in Ueno that we had to wait in line for a little bit, which I think was like a pretty, she'd recommended it, so I went. And I don't know if it was just what I ordered or if it just, I just found it was okay. It wasn't great. It was okay. So we went to that place, had lunch. I think it was also just my stomach it was different flavors, different, tastes. It's really different from what we have here when it comes to ramen. I haven't went to that many places that taste that similar. And after that, we walked up this big hill into Ueno Park, which was, Ueno is one of my favorite places in Tokyo, probably my favorite district in Tokyo. I just absolutely loved it, and we went through the park. We went up and we looked around. We saw a guy who's like a robot statue thing dancing. That was pretty cool. and we went by a big fountain. I think there was some food stalls and stuff, and there were some performances. And I think that day I got all shrined out because I saw so many shrines and so many, temples and stuff just walking around that whole park. And I know some people would say, oh, there's so many better ones in Kyoto and all these other places, but there were some pretty cool ones in Ueno, and I got to see so many of them in that one day. Afterwards, I was like, I don't need to see temples for a couple of days, So yeah, I walked around there. I remember it took me a while to find a bathroom. That was the only one complaint I had about Ueno Park. Finding a bathroom wasn't that easy. And I was also really worried I was going to have to use an Eastern style toilet, the old squat toilet. That was my biggest fear in Japan, and I never ever used a squat toilet the entire time I was in Japan. But I did use the Western style toilets, and they were a bit weird. They were a little bit weird, and I remember we walked around the whole Ueno. We went through Ueno Park. We went sort of by the big there's a big river